Great. Well, Larry, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for spending time with us on this conversation as we kind of explore the issues related to how servant leaders are taking stance and working hard in this, incredibly polarized and time filled with tragedy and concern. And really, how do you understand how people really work to keep the hope alive in the work you do? So Larry, I'd love it if you could share a little bit with us what you do and how you got started at what you do, and what do you think are the biggest challenges facing you in your work today?
Sure. Well, I'll start at a really high level. And first of all, it's a pleasure to be here speaking with you today. So engaging schools, we collaborate with educators to create equitable and engaging classroom, schools, and districts. And we're looking to support schools that are really ultimately supporting students' academic, social, and emotional learning and development. That's really the mission of the organization. And the way we do that is we partner with whole districts and with schools. And we provide leadership support, we provide professional learning, we provide coaching, resources that support the efforts of schools and districts. And ultimately what we're aiming for is systemic shifts in policies and structures and mindsets and practices. That's at a high level what the organization is all about. And I'd be happy to make the links if you'd like to equity in our work.
I'd love that because you work nationally, you're in a lot of different communities, and this issue of what does equity mean is something that we all struggle with. And then I suspect that in different districts, people respond to that language differently. And I'd love to hear some of those stories.
Yes, and of course we're in a hot time with all the attacks on critical race theory. There's a lot that gets swept, and SEL. There's a lot that gets swept into that from place to place. So let me start with what we see as the end goal of equity strategies, and that is to achieve equal outcomes for all groups within the same classification, whether that's race or gender or class or religion, so that no groups that a student is part of predict outcomes. That's really how we think of the goal of the equity work we do, and thus that's what we're supporting schools to achieve.
I can tell you that's a radically powerful claim. A lot of people talk about equity is making sure that regardless of one's race, class, gender, you have transparent and fair access to opportunity.
Yeah.
You're taking it, am I hearing right? You're taking that next step and saying that their demographic background should not be predictive of the outcomes they have from those opportunities.
That's correct, and that's the outcome that we engage in conversation with districts about. And there's a lot, I'll unpack that a little bit further. We think that it begins with the belief that every student is capable of success and that recognizes the uniqueness and strengths of each and every student. That's a core mindset that needs to sit below equity work. And again, part of what we do is unpack these with the districts and schools that we partner with. And we also believe that equitable schools are committed to fairness, creating access, and closing gaps. And I'll say a little bit about each of these. So with regard to fairness, schools that are committed to equity identify and eliminate the biases and barriers to students' success in school, and in particular the barriers that relate to the different groups that students are part of, whether it's race, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, et cetera, the whole host of different identity groups. And then also that schools recognize and appreciate and differences as strengths that students bring in each of these areas. We also talk about equitable schools you said this, but equitable schools creating access, that schools create high quality educational opportunities that are accessible to all students. And even more than that educators not only establish high expectations, but provide high levels of support. Expectations alone are not sufficient. That need to go hand in hand with with the support that makes it possible.
Yes.
And then
so many people miss that, the resources of providing the support as important as the resources to create rigor.
That's right. That's exactly right. Mm-hmm. And then that equitable schools work to close gaps, and various gaps. We are particularly these days paying a lot of attention to the gaps in how discipline is handled by schools and districts. And there are, as you I'm sure know, distinct gaps are based on race, special education status, and other identity aspects of identity as well.
So, Larry, as you go into schools, are there any patterns among the professionals who respond well and eagerly to what you bring, and any patterns to those educators, professionals, families who kind of say, wait a minute, that's too, who are more, let's call it resistant, not necessarily opposed, but just resistant to, the changes that this commitment would demand?
Yeah, that's a good question about patterns. First of all, we recognize that this work takes time, mm-hmm. And the opportunities for professional learning are critically important, and not only professional learning, but opportunities to reflect, on one's own mm-hmm. background and culture and upbringing and how that influences current mindsets. The opportunity to listen, to engage in dialogue and listen mm-hmm. to others, mm-hmm. And then to learn about dynamics and issues that educators may not be familiar with. There's a lot of work done around bias, for example.
Around what? Say that again, please.
Around bias, understanding bias, understanding implicit and explicit bias, understanding mm-hmm. the difference between interpersonal and systemic and institutionalized bias, for example. And then really unpacking where that lives and how that manifests in classrooms and schools and districts. There's a lot of learning that can and needs to take place. And again, it's not just telling or talk, it's not just one directional. It absolutely needs to be a dialogue. And we put a lot of emphasis on establishing trust, relational mm-hmm. trust, mm-hmm. As the basis of successful transformation.
Helping people feel safe. So, implicit in your conversation is this ethic of caring.
Yes.
That to engage in this work, to achieve equity, it has to start with true caring, not just for the kids, but for the adults in the community and context. So caring for who they are, where they are. Is that both a fair assessment, and how difficult is that to do consistently?
It's a fair assessment, and it's difficult to do consistently. It really takes, we talk about it requiring time, attention, and intention mm-hmm. on a steady mm-hmm. basis. Leadership matters a lot. We use the phrase establishing a caring civic community built on relational trust. And, there's a few different ideas built into that. And, one of the core ideas is that the adults really need to model and live mm-hmm. Live this. And when there's a lot of evidence that suggests when they do, that the students then will demonstrate and emulate the same sorts of things. Mm-hmm. And schools are more likely, when they succeed in establishing this kind of culture and climate, they're more likely to succeed with broader transformational efforts. There's again research that out there that supports that notion. And so schools need to create a sense of community that welcomes all individuals and that helps people learn to work together across differences. Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm.
So you mentioned civics as part of that. So caring, community, trusting, but also when you talk about civics, what does that mean to you in your work?
We talk about civic engagement, and ultimately it means providing opportunities for all the adults and young people to be part of intentionally creating the schooling experience and the culture mm-hmm. and the climate mm-hmm. to have various opportunities to participate in shaping classrooms, the school as a whole. And it's not just the adults, and it's not just the young people in school, it's drawing families in as well.
So you're talking more than knowing the three forms of government and political parties. You're talking about, and correct me if these aren't the good words, the predilection to engage in your community to improve its ability to serve all members.
That's
at your developmental stage. How do you do that appropriately?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how critical is that approach to civic engagement to producing equitable outcomes?
In our minds, it is crucial because people, adults and young people need to believe that they can shape the goals and outcomes of the school, and for young people, they need to believe in their own efficacy, both individual and collective efficacy. So feeling like one is an active participant in the community and shaping that community is really a core underlying experience and belief.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So as you go into a school and start building relational trust, getting people to examine their belief systems, their biases, implicit and explicit, begin to think, where are the levers in the curriculum or behavior of the average school that you find when pulled correctly, produce the highest levels of change?
So I will talk about the specific services that we provide, because I think they get at the question that you're answering. We have 3 core services that we offer. One is called Engaged Classrooms. Another is in the arena of climate and culture. And the third revolves around developing and implementing codes of character, conduct, and support. Mm-hmm. And I can say a little bit about each of these because I think they provide windows of opportunity. So I'll start with our Engaged Classrooms work. It is, first of all, a body of work. It's grounded in a commitment to culturally responsive and developmentally informed practice, and also to building cultural competency among adults. That's important to recognize. There are a few other frameworks that are important parts of the model. One is a belief in multi-tiered systems of support, providing universal supports to all students, and then really targeted supports at tier 2 and tier 3 to some students as needed. We also are firm believers in what we call learning and life competencies. This is you might think of this as our version of SEL coupled with academic learning competencies. And so there in our framework, we talk about self-awareness, self-management, social efficacy, and academic efficacy. So that's where there's a little bit of difference with a straight up SEL approach. And then distinct skill sets in each of those, and importantly, desired target behaviors associated with each that make it possible to create look-for tools so that teachers can be looking for the desired target behaviors if they're intentionally trying to build learning and life competencies in students. And we're advocates of an approach that integrates academic, social, and emotional learning and embeds it in daily practice in the classroom rather than separate in some kind of way.
You don't have this is our SEL moment. This is our civics engagement moment. It's like this gets built into the working of each classroom each day, and the schedule integrates this opportunities to work on the emotional stuff, the academic efficacy that is built into the daily practice.
That's exactly right. And I'll give you one quick story about a practice. We've worked with a number of schools at this point, but I'm thinking of one in particular in a mid-sized city in the Northeast. And the school that I'm thinking of, the school committed and the teachers committed that they would each mentor one student. And they were trained in an academic turnaround conference protocol, which is a protocol that they can use over time to support a student in turning around their academic, as the title suggests, their academic performance. They provide a variety of different kinds of support in this protocol. And what was striking for us is that teachers were saying things like, I had no idea that so-and-so was thinking in this kind of way. I had no idea that so-and-so gets the support from home that I didn't think was there.
Yeah.
You know, it may not be as effective as I want, but it's there. I had no idea that so-and-so cared in the way that he or she does about doing well. And so part of what happens is not only the act of providing support in a structured way to students, but the act of learning by the adults and connecting in a deeper way and personalizing a relationship, understanding the power of personalized relationships.
It sounds, we both had some associations with independent schools prior to our engagement more directly into the public system. But it sounds like those are the values that one expects at an independent school of one-on-one teacher relationship, that mentoring relationship that we'll talk about, that now you're building that into the practice in the public arena in a way that hasn't historically always been available.
Yeah, that's right. I'll move on to our second area. I'll try to move on through these and we can come back to any of them. Our second arena is work around climate and culture, and it's really about implementing intentional initiatives to create safe and respectful and welcoming climates and learning-focused cultures in schools. And I'll just give, again, another example from one initiative. We have an initiative that focuses on partnering with schools to create safe and welcoming public spaces in schools. So hallways, cafeterias, entry and exit areas, a lot of the places where, there can be a lot of chaos, disorder, sometimes violent behavior, unwanted behavior. And the school that I'm thinking of created hall scan stations. They had a problem with frequent flyers, students out in the hallways between classes and too many of them. And they set up hall stations that were staffed by a combination of administrative and school safety personnel. And part of what they did really was to, when students were out, they would stop them and talk with them, but not in a gotcha kind of way, and we're going to punish you now kind of way, but instead to connect with the students and have a conversation with them about school and about their life and about what's leading them to be in a quick version of a root cause analysis. And the long and the short of it is they started playing roles, and we started hearing examples where they would find out that the student was having problems at home, and they would connect the student and a social worker. Or they would find out that the student was having problems in a couple of classes and couldn't seem to get beyond it. They'd connect the student and a counselor. They would figure out that the student was probably depressed and orchestrate the connection with an outside provider, mental health provider, or that a student was anxious and needed to really talk with a social worker. So it became a way of providing support, and often it was the more marginalized students were out in the hallways between classes and for whom school had not been working. So that's another example of a service. And then our third service is, and really it's possibly the most comprehensive one, because it involves partnerships over multiple years, is working with the district to revise and implement a code of character, conduct, and support. And there's a 4-stage process. It starts with an assessment and an identification of the inequities that exist, with an aim to reduce exclusion, because one of the dynamics that interferes with students' success is lost learning time that results from exclusion, and disproportional discipline, which is common in most schools and most districts. There's an inclusive process then with lots of constituents, including teachers and student support staff and administrators, district level, school level, families, community members, students, in a process then of over the course of much of a year of really providing input and feedback and developing a new code if one doesn't exist, or transforming an existing one into a code of character, conduct, and support, a broader idea. And again, the aim is systemic shifts in policies and systems and mindsets and practices. And it's really ultimately about shaping a culture, shaping a restorative, accountable, and equitable culture, developing common language, common practice, a sense of this is how we do things at this school, and then orienting everyone in the district to the new code, and then implementing it for typically for multiple years after that. Changes at all levels and among various constituents. And we've begun to see very powerful results both in terms of reducing lost learning time and reducing disproportional discipline in districts that are a ways into this.
Larry, as you describe that, as you know, my primary engagement in schools right now is organized around the Boston Public Schools.
Yeah.
And have districts of this size been successful at taking on such a broad systemic change? Or do you find more success or is there anything pattern of success in districts by size in your experience?
Yeah, well, that's a really, really good question. And I think we would tend to say that we've seen pockets of success in large urban communities like Boston, for example, or New York City, or others of the big urban communities. But it's hard to point to system-wide change that sort of reaches all levels and all places. There are certainly pockets of tremendous success. We've tended to work in recent years with medium-sized and smaller urban communities, where we conceivably can hold hope of reaching all of the various constituencies in different parts of the system. We have a graphic that we use called the gears that shows all the different, what we think are some of the major parts of the system. So we have tended to intentionally focus our area in that way because we think we have the greatest chance of real systemic change.
And early in the conversation, and I can see when you even talk about New York or Boston, the way sometimes they're regional, in LA, Philadelphia, they're in or a larger area, they're regional superintendents or groupings of schools around some organizing principle who would take on this in a way that seems more effective than if it's coming down from the central office. Central office has a harder time, even though we've redone our code of conduct. It took us 5-6 years to get every school to even say they're using it, and whether they're well trained in it is another challenge. But so that I think that larger schools have that challenge particularly if they start top down.
That's right. That's right. And our process is intentionally an inclusive one. In the second phase after the assessment, there's a large task force that gets established. In a medium-sized district, there might be 60 to 70 people in it. We're working in one where they have 90 schools. They actually have 4 regions, and they've created 4 task forces. So there's 4 times that number of people. But in this district of 80 to 90 schools, they've involved 300 people in a deep kind of way. And that's, you could think on the one hand, that's just scratching the surface in a district that big, but that's a big number of people very involved in a change process.
And particularly about a pro-social outcome. We can get people out on school time. We can get people out on closing schools. We can get people out on some of the negative challenges that every district faces. Getting that large group of people around a pro-social system change is really a remarkable accomplishment. And you use the word character, which, across, and one of the reasons I was looking forward to have this conversation with you is that in our experience at the center, the people who talk about character, people talk about civics, people talk about social emotional learning, people talk about equity. They don't all necessarily talk about all 4, and you do. This is an uncommon integration. So when you think of, you talked about civics, and clearly you've talked about the social emotional and the equity. So in your work, what's the word character mean, and how do you see it and use it in the work?
Well, you hear it, we talk about a code of character, conduct, and support. So it is, we tend to use it when we're talking about a holistic view of a young person and the goals of schooling. That it's not, that educating for character, for the dispositions of character, along with the skills and competencies of social and emotional learning, really need to go hand in hand. You know, in fact, one without the other is sort of missing.
So what were in your group? When you say the dispositions of character, how do you use that word? What is that? What are those dispositions?
Yeah, you know, we tend to elicit that from the districts and schools we work with, rather than rather than impose or even suggest it.
Yeah. You know, the conversation we were having a couple of years ago where, you know, the importance of making this locally relevant demands your approach.
Yeah.
So those dispositions are going to sound differently in Menlo Park, California, from Burlington, Vermont.
Right.
And that is okay, but both groups need to know what they believe in. And is that fair that they need to know what they believe in and organize to it and not make it a implicit or unexamined part of the life, but you lift it up and examine it so that they can integrate it into their work.
That's right. And you know, and it's often a way that parents and communities can latch on because they care about it. You know, we've seen the polls and the surveys over the years. Parents care a lot about parents of all different political persuasions care a lot about of character. They may put emphases in different places, but there's a lot of commonality there.
So Larry, for you and your staff, what are the biggest emotional challenges for doing this work? And in many ways, what are the challenges? What are the ways it challenges your sense of your character and your ability to care?
Oh, great questions. So you know, I mean, there's the challenges right now, and then there's, if we could step away from the last 3 years, there's broader challenges. Because, you know, certainly one challenge is name it, that so many educators are so exhausted right now from the distinct challenges that are pandemic related, and that's hard. And it's, you know, I think. You know, we're also encouraged to see a lot of educators kind of looking outward, looking to next year, retouching their aspirations, their larger aspirations for schooling and for education, which is encouraging. You know, and it's so there's that, living with that dynamic is a challenge. There's some other things too. You know, we talked about the need related to a lot of things for professional learning time. And we see a steady erosion of a commitment to professional learning time in most, not all, but many schools and districts. You know, a shrinking of the amount of time that's available for professional learning. And it's hard then to engage in significant change efforts if you don't have professional learning. You know, another challenge.
Which is interesting because when you look at the research on school improvement and change and schools that do close gaps, all of them talk about the value of shared professional learning time as central to their systematic approach to meeting the needs of their kids. And it's one of the core elements that almost all the research in this area say. And who's taking it away and why?
You know, I think it happens in a variety of ways. I think, you know, the push to have time on task with students has been one of the factors that lead, you know, states and then districts and then schools to take away professional learning time and redirect it to time on task. I think, you know, sometimes contract negotiations. Looking for time taken away. So I think you know, we've seen financially, you know, financial factors and that's contributing factors as well. So I think there are a lot of different dynamics going into it, and it is not true everywhere, but we see it in an awful lot of places. Another big challenge that we face is just the movement of leaders. You know, the work that we care most deeply about or feel most strongly about is the deeper systemic work we're able to do in some places over periods of time. And usually that requires continuity of leadership. And when that gets disrupted, when superintendents and other district leaders move on or principals move on, that there's the risk that priorities change and commitments change. And,
Yep. And as you saw, the state report reviewing of the Boston Public Schools, that was the criticism. Yeah, that with instability in leadership, it's very hard to build a coherent, systematic change, and problems just snowball and get worse.
Yeah.
And the emergencies take over the work you're doing is not an emergency, but we know that if you do it well, you'll have less emergencies when you're done.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, all right, I just want two more questions before, and I want to thank you very much for the time you shared with us. One is, if you were starting over again in this work, what would you know now, what would you take with you as the most important thing to guide your decision making if you were starting all over? Or if you're recruiting someone into your organization as they're starting out to take on this work, what are the things you recommend that they really focus on and think about?
They're great questions, by the way. I would say it's important to recognize that there's enduring themes and things that change. By the way, it's our 40th anniversary year. Our commitment to equity is really rooted in a commitment to social justice that started 40 years ago, that we hold to this day. And so the commitment to equity really grows out of that. I think what I would say is that I would encourage people to hold on to a holistic view of the nature of the positive school experience for young people. To really look at something that speaks to an integrated sense of academic, social, and emotional learning and development. To recognize that climate and culture matter a lot. They're foundational to the learning experience, and that school success will ultimately, and academic success even more narrowly, will derive from some effectively addressing all of these intersecting needs. And then I would take encourage people to take a systems change approach. I think we've gotten better and better at that ourselves, at recognizing the different parts of a system, working across constituent groups, and supporting collaboration across constituent groups, and taking a long view, creating plans that how to bring change in systems and structures and mindsets and practices over time. Not try to do it in this month or this year or even
for the next MCAS or whatever.
That it really takes the long view, and recognize that all of those are important pieces. The mindsets and practices go hand in hand. Systems, structures, policies all go hand in hand. It's all one big bundle within the system.
Implicit within that thinking, would you suggest, and I'm going to be honest, I hope you are suggesting this, so let me be very explicit, that if you focus on this type of system change, it takes a certain period of time to get into a right organization, that its success will be self-reinforcing to the system. That once you get that good system going and you care for it, it will self-generate improvement and constantly responsive to new changes in the world. And if you care for that, it will self-sustain. It will be self-sustaining. And if you don't, if you try to do this year, this next year, the thing of the moment, some things will get better, but the whole system won't, and it won't be sustainable.
That's what we believe. It's what we see, and it is what we aim to communicate.
Great. Well, Larry, my last question, I'm borrowing shamelessly from Ezra Klein, who asked his people, what are the 3 books they would recommend? I'm going to make it broader than that. What are the 3 podcast, books, experiences that you would recommend, or that you find meaningful and useful, that are a good part of your day, or that you think of, oh, people should listen to this, or people should read this? What are 3 things that come to your mind?
Oh boy, I may have to get back to you about that. I will shamelessly say that one of the books that I turn to continuously is one of our own, our book called Engaged Classrooms.
Great.
I find myself turning to it on a regular basis for whether it's insights or specific practices or how we said this something, very specific. So that's certainly one of the things. I'm trying to think about podcasts about education specific.
Oh, it doesn't have to be education. These are things that part of it is, how do you nurture yourself? What are the things that you reach out to that become meaningful for you as a way to stay in this work and be engaged and focused?
Yeah, I love to listen to the Daily, the New York Times podcast. I feel like it has me just thinking and keeps me grounded in the larger world with a deep dive into different perspectives on a variety of issues. So anything that does that, I enjoy quite a bit.
Well, I'll give you an example. I was recommended last spring, The Slowdown, which is a podcast about poetry, and I admit that poetry was never big in my life. I have a couple people I've been passionate about, but it was never. But the manager, they give a poem a day, and they can give it in context, and then they read it. 5 minutes, great when you're walking the dog or in between errands. But that would be my recommendation if you're looking for something to relax and all the pressure of the world. The Slowdown is a very nice moment. Well, Larry, once again, thank you for your time and attention. And most of all, thank you for the great work you do for all our children. And we really appreciate it.
Thanks, Hardin. Wonderful speaking with you. Take good care.